Amazing Couples by Victor Yap and Doris Monk. Chapter 3. All that glitters is salt, not gold. Genesis chapter 19, verses 1 to 26. While we were studying at the seminary, my good friend from Northern California was hopping mad when he heard people say that the 1989 earthquake was a sign of God's displeasure at and judgment on San Francisco, also known as the homosexual capital of the world. When the 7.1 Richter scale earthquake hit San Francisco in the summer of 1989, people died, buildings shook, and a bridge collapsed. A student wrote an article in the student newspaper declaring God's judgment upon the homosexuals of San Francisco and California for the hedonistic people, sinful lifestyle, and weird thinking that were part of the West Coast. My friend, whose parents, siblings, nephews, and nieces were in San Francisco, went ballistic. As the editor of the student newspaper, he wrote an editorial cautioning against rushing into judgment, extolling God's love for sinners, and reminding readers of the spiritual impact of Californian pastors like Chuck Swindoll, John MacArthur, and Chuck Smith, the quality education he received at Biola College, the effective ministry of parachurch groups like Campus Crusade and World Vision that were based there, and godly Christians in California who attend the numerous churches there every week. Indeed, the judgment of Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis 19 is a shocking passage to read, and even tougher to teach and apply. Many Christians are uncomfortable with the content, the language, and especially the ending of the text. Some others, unfortunately, have taken the text and the opportunity to gloat at the behavior, the condemnation, and the destruction of homosexuals. The situation in Sodom and Gomorrah is more complicated than merely a single issue. It is about the corruption of normal man and woman relationships, 19 verse 5, the outbreak of violence in people-to-people relationship, 19:9, and the evil in fallen man's heart toward God, 19:13. Earlier in Genesis 13, Lot foolishly chose a prosperous city for residence based on its busy surroundings, appealing landscape, and fertile land. But he ended up in a morally low society, a spiritually bankrupt place, Genesis 13:10, and a politically dangerous situation. The word war, Genesis 14:2, made its biblical debut in Sodom. Abraham had to rescue his stubborn nephew when the kings of the east invaded Sodom, Genesis 14:12. In Genesis 18, God promised Abraham that he would not destroy Sodom if even 10 righteous people were in it. Why was Sodom and Gomorrah judged? How are we to respond to temptation in an immoral, irreligious, and irreversible environment? What should we do when wrong is considered right, the spiritual climate is hopeless, and when judgment is imminent? First, separate yourself before sin strikes. Genesis chapter 19, verses 4 to 11. Before they had gone to bed, all the men from every part of the city of Sodom, both young and old, surrounded the house. They called to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we can have sex with them." Lot went outside to meet them and shut the door behind him and said, "No, my friends, don't do this wicked thing. Look, I have 2 daughters who have never slept with a man. Let me bring them out to you, and you can do what you like with them. But don't do anything to these men, for they have come under the protection of my roof." "Get out of our way," they replied. And they said, "This fella came here as an alien, and now he wants to play the judge. We'll treat you worse than them." They kept bringing pressure on Lot and moved forward to break down the door. But the men inside reached out and pulled Lot back into the house and shut the door. Then they struck the men who were at the door of the house, young and old, with blindness so that they could not find the door. In the November 1987 Reader's Digest, Betty Wine retells an old tale she heard from Elie Wiesel. A just man comes to Sodom hoping to save the city. He pickets. What else can he do? He goes from street to street, marketplace to marketplace, shouting, "Men and women, repent. What are you doing is wrong. It will kill you. It will destroy you." They laugh, but he goes on shouting, until one day a child stops him. "Poor stranger, don't you see it's useless?" "Yes," the just man replies. "Then why do you go on?" the child asks. "I was convinced that I would change them. Now I go on shouting because I don't want them to change me." Were there 10 righteous people in Sodom and Gomorrah, 1832, as Abraham had hoped? In the end, Lot was the only righteous resident and closest to a normal person in Sodom. Would you live there? Start your family. Mingle with them. Lot believed he could handle the people, the lifestyle, and the environment. Today, many people think they can handle pornography, alcohol, drugs, sex, and anything bad, unhealthy, or harmful without being burned or facing serious consequences or disastrous results. Lot's life was inadvertently changed, tested, and terrorized by his neighbors. The verb wickedly occurs for the first time in the Bible. Verse 7. Why had God not destroyed California areas like the San Fernando Valley, the pornography capital of the world, or San Francisco, the gay capital of the world, and other crime and sin capitals of the world? No one is safe. Tony Campolo said, "If God is not going to judge this generation, he will have to apologize to Sodom." Let me suggest why the Lord has spared us, how we can still save the communities in our society today, and what we can do to make an impact even when destruction comes. Christians are the salt and light of the world, the conscience and voice of a society, people who should stand out like a sore thumb. They shine in the dark, walk in the light, and do the right thing. Sadly, Lot resembled his neighbors. In offering his daughters to the repulsive crowd, Genesis 19:8, he behaved just as weird, wrong, and worldly as the people around him. In the end, Lot's speaking out was ineffective, Genesis 19:9. Why? 2 Peter 2:8 tells us he was living among them day after day, tormented in his righteous soul by the lawless deeds he saw and heard. Living, 2 Peter 2:8, is living in Greek, so living among is living in. Two ins, which describes where. Day after day is the when. Tormented is the what, which is synonymous with the terrible suffering or grievous torment of a servant paralyzed by palsy. Matthew 8:6. The torture or torment of the demon-possessed men when they met Jesus, Matthew 8:29, and the boat tossed or buffeted, Matthew 14:24, by the waves. In short, Lot was ignorant of his neighbors, identical with them, and irrelevant to them. How are you different from the world around you? Are you walking in the counsel of the wicked, standing in the path of sinners, sitting in the seat of scoffers? Second, step away from worsening conditions. Genesis 19, verses 12 to 22. The two men said to Lot, "Do you have anyone else here, sons-in-law, sons or daughters, or anyone else in the city who belongs to you? Get them out of here, because we are going to destroy this place. The outcry of the Lord against its people is so great that he has sent us to destroy it." So Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law, who were pledged to marry his daughters. He said, "Hurry and get out of this place, because the Lord is about to destroy the city." But his sons-in-law thought he was joking. With the coming of dawn, the angels urged Lot, saying, "Take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, or you will be swept away when the city is punished." When he hesitated, the man grasped his hand and the hands of his wife and of his 2 daughters and led them safely out of the city, for the Lord was merciful to them. As soon as they had brought them out, one of them said, Flee for your lives. Don't look back, and don't stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the mountains, or you will be swept away. But Lot said to them, No, my lords, please. Your servant has found favor in your eyes, and you have shown great kindness to me in sparing my life. But I can't flee to the mountains. This disaster will overtake me, and I'll die. Look, here is a town near enough to run to, and it is small. Let me flee to it. It is very small, isn't it? Then my life will be spared. He said to him, Very well. I will grant this request too. I will not overthrow the town you speak of, but flee there quickly, because I cannot do anything until you reach it. That's why the town was called Zoar. The mother of Mencius, the famous Confucian scholar of the Warring States period, paid particular attention to the education of her son. The young Mencius and his mother at first lived near a cemetery. When Mencius saw people mourning at the burial of the dead, he started to imitate them playfully. He cried loudly, kowtowed nonstop, and burned incense like them. Mencius' mother said, This is not a place for my son to live. They immediately moved to a place near a market. At the next stop, when Mencius saw vendors bragging about what they wanted to sell and making money, he started again to imitate them. He hawked, shouted, and bargained like a street vendor. Mencius' mother said, This is also not a suitable place for my son to live. Again they moved immediately, but this time to a place near a school. His mother finally said, This is a suitable place for my child to live. It was here that they finally settled down. Lot was the proverbial frog in the kettle that will jump out of boiling water immediately, but will die in cold water, rising slowly a degree at a time. The weird surroundings, the odd behavior, and the immoral majority did not hasten his move. He thought he would be fine so long as they did not bother him, so long as he minded his business and the boundaries were clear. It did not occur to him that Sodom was not the right place to raise an upright, healthy, and normal family. The signs were clear. Lot faced immovable roadblocks and rising opposition, not just from without and from outsiders, but also from within and at home. His sons-in-law laughed at him. Verse 14, his wife loved the world. Later his daughters committed incest with him. Their father, Genesis 19:33-35, and even he himself delayed. Verse 16. The word make its debut in the Bible, but the meaning in Hebrew is lingered, King James Version, rather than hesitated, NIV. Hesitated refers to the heart. Lingered refers to the hours. The former has to do with tentativeness, the latter with timeline. The same word occurs one other time in Genesis, describing how Joseph's 10 brothers lingered, King James Version, delayed, NIV, in Canaan instead of returning to Egypt with Benjamin, Genesis 43:10, as he requested. Lot could not convince his future in-laws, verse 14, his wife and daughters, or even himself to leave. The family did not change the world changed them. Ironically, the people of the city told him in vain to leave. Get out of our way. Genesis 19:9. The angels had to bend backward for Lot's family, yell at them to run, and literally drag Lot out of town. 19:17. Grasp, verse 16, occurs for the first time in the Bible. It has a sense of hardening or strengthening. Genesis 48:2 and Exodus 4:21. Of one's grip in this case. Can you imagine angels having to harden their grip to seize the family? Human strength was not sufficient to move them. Superhuman strength was needed to yank them away. The word escape occurs 5 times in the chapter, verses 17, 19, 20, and 22, and is an imperative spoken each time by the angels, verses 17, 17, and 22. Finally, the angels yielded to Lot's request to stop when they were safer, though not safely, at the next town, 19:19-21. Lot thought like a carnal man. The problem is not so serious. It is not so simple to leave, and the judgment won't be so sudden. I cannot leave without my wife. My family is not ready yet, and the engagement date is already set. The angel's eightfold imperatives fell on deaf ears. Get out, verse 12 and 14. Hurry, verse 14 and 15. Take, verse 15, and flee, verses 17 and 22. Haste, verse 22, or PL, King James Version. Third, smarten up in the future. Genesis 19, verses 23 to 26. By the time Lot reached Zoar, the sun had risen over the land. Then the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. Thus he overthrew those cities and the entire plain, including all those living in the cities, and also the vegetation in the land. But Lot's wife looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. When Hurricane Andrew struck and devastated the Florida Peninsula south of Miami on August 24, 1992, with winds 165 miles per hour and with gusts stronger than 200 miles per hour, it left a $25 billion bill of damage and a record as the most costly natural disaster in U.S. history at that time. In the hours before Andrew's pending eastward travel to the nearby coast of Louisiana the next day, CNN interviewed a man about his present and future plans with this question. How are you preparing for Hurricane Andrew? The man replied, I'm moving my family from Louisiana to Arkansas. Arkansas, the man asked. Isn't that a bit far? The man who planned to move more than 200 miles inland answered, No, when you're gonna run, you better run far enough. The man was right. Hurricane Andrew left 28 people dead in Florida and Louisiana. The judgment on Sodom could not be prevented or delayed, but the punishment for Lot's wife could have been avoided. How many warnings did the angels give Lot and his family? 3. Chapter 19, verses 12, 15, and 17. At the last warning, verse 17, how many commands were there? I used to think there were 2. Actually, there were 4. Run for your lives. Do not look back. Do not stop. Run to the mountains. The first and last actions are imperatives and are the same word in Hebrew, also marking its debut in the Bible, occurring altogether 5 times in the chapter, verses 17, 17, 19, 20, and 22, more than any chapter in the Bible. The middle 2 are Joseph's, or exhortations. Even then, Lot's wife looked back, and at that point the supernatural protection of God was gone. The Dead Sea region, with its rich minerals, petroleum, bitumen, salt, and sulfur, rained on her. She not only stayed too long in Sodom and Gomorrah, she left her heart there, and her eyes veered naturally, longingly, and unfortunately, dangerously at the city. Was she thinking of relatives and friends? No, she was concerned for treasures on earth. Someone once said, what the mind does not attend to, it dismisses. What it attends to, it considers. What the mind attends to continually, it believes. And what the mind believes, it eventually does. Lot's wife left the city, but the city did not leave her. It was in her system, blood, world, heart, and mind. Conclusion. 1 John 2:15 says, Do not love the world or anything in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. Further, the Bible does not merely admonish believers to avoid evil, but to avoid every kind of evil. 1 Thessalonians 5:22. Do you love the world? Have you fastened on to the things of the world? Is the love of the Father in you? The road to God is a narrow gate, but the road to destruction is wide. So we must protect and save ourselves from this corrupt generation. Are you holding on to the word of life so that you do not compete or labor for nothing? Bible study questions. Group study. 1. List the characters in the passage. Who in Lot's family were extended God's plan of salvation? verses 12 and 13. God protected Lot for whose sake? Verse 29. What did Lot have to do? What must his family members do to be delivered? What did the Lord request of the angels during the escape? 3. Where did Lot live? It is a fertile land and a fighting hotspot. Genesis 13, 10 to 11, 14, 8 to 12. 4. Why did Lot return to Sodom and Gomorrah after Abraham rescued him from the kings who invaded the place? Chapter 19, verse 1 to 3. Did Lot recognize the angels? Why did Lot eagerly greet and protect them? Chapter 19, verse 1 to 3. Why did Lot linger and not leave? Verse 16. Did he understand the urgency? Why were Lot's sons-in-law destroyed along with the people of the city? Chapter 19, verse 14. Why did Lot's wife turn into a pillar of salt? 5. Did Lot become as one of the local people? How did they treat him? Verses 4 to 9. Progression. How the people of Sodom treated Lot. Verses 4 to 9. How God treated the people of Sodom. Verses 23 to 25. From Doris the psychologist's desk. God intended to save Lot and his family. Unfortunately, this family was still broken up because Lot's sons-in-law refused to leave. The Lord's angels took Lot's hands, his wife's hands, and his daughter's hands, and led them safely out of the city. They now are freed and could run for their lives. Unfortunately, Lot's wife looked back and was turned into a pillar of salt. This reality may be harsh. The truth is that unless a couple is committed to walk God's path together, it is hard not to feel the strain. If your spouse is not a believer yet, you can easily understand the tension. Or if your spouse is a believer but has remained carnal with limited spiritual growth, it may still feel very lonesome for you to grow spiritually. Sometimes it appears that your growth in the Lord drives you two further apart. It is challenging, and I do not have an easy answer for you. But here are some steps for you to consider. 1. Pray for your spouse's salvation or spiritual growth. Remember that their change is for the Lord's sake and for their own benefit, and not yours. 2. Continue your spiritual growth without reservation. Seek the Lord for wisdom in all matters of your family, even if your spouse may not join you in prayer. Wait on the Lord and see how He may change things. Draw near to Him, and He will also draw near to you. Your transformation in Him is the best testimony to your spouse. 3. Do not condemn or put down your spouse as if you are the better half. This would only push him or her further away. 4. Seek opportunities to invite or encourage your spouse to participate in church or fellowship activities. You may need wisdom to find programs or activities that meet their spiritual needs. God's guidance is the most important. 5. Get support from others. You need a prayer community to support you. Moreover, brothers and sisters may be able to invite your spouse to church. Remember, you need to pray for the Lord's hand leading you, your spouse, and your whole family. Only He can change a person. He loves your spouse more than you do. Group sharing. 1. Discuss how to lead family members to Christ. 2. Share whether the family members are on the same spiritual path and on the right track to following God. 3. What worldly things as a couple do you need to forsake, and what godly things do you need to pursue? 4. Ask group members to bear witness to how God has changed their families. And 5. Pray for one another's family and for loved ones who have not accepted Christ. Praise for your witness at home.